The world is full of strange places, people, customs, and things, and perhaps one of the strangest things of all is to be found in one of our Latin American neighbors to the south, El Salvador. The Republic of El Salvador in Central America is usually referred to as the land of lakes and volcanoes. It is approximately the size of our own state of Maryland. Looking through the devil's doorway, we can readily understand why Robert Ripley once said, "Believe it or not, wherever there is a visible horizon in El Salvador, there is at least one volcano in sight." The Republic of El Salvador is relatively young. Its history dates back to pre-Spanish days. Its most prominent landmarks, and certainly the most ominous, are the volcanoes, especially the one that we're going to see, the volcano of Izalco, often called the Lighthouse of the Pacific. And the very same one which the hero of our story hopes to conquer. And to meet that gentleman, we now travel 10 miles north to the capital of the country, San Salvador. It's the most important commercial center in Central America today, and the city of San Salvador is often mistaken for the name of the country. But El Salvador is the name of the nation, while San Salvador is its most important city. By air, San Salvador is 4 hours from Panama, 4 from Mexico City, and 5 from New Orleans, Louisiana, and the latter is exactly where the star of our story is coming from, and his name is Duroc J. Hebert. By trade, he's a shoe salesman, and all his life he has dreamed of doing something daring and adventurous, and something that no one has ever accomplished before. During his short stay at the capital city, he said he was interested in photographing the baskets and other items carried by the populace on their heads, and the fact that all of the carriers just happened to be women, he says, was purely coincidental. But in a more serious vein, Hebert's main purpose for coming here was to meet with some of the local authorities so that they could provide him with more information about the Izalco volcano, and if possible, lead him to a reputable guide. Although Paul Reyes, the head of the local tourist bureau, was glad to welcome the American, when he heard exactly what he wanted to do, he was somewhat reluctant for Hebert's sake to help him. "Senor, what you have in mind is crazy, sure suicide, and out of the question. I'll not be a partner to this crime," he said. But the next day, after Hebert poured on some of his super salesmanship, he found himself on the highway heading for Izalco, chauffeuring Hebert and showing him some of the sights along the way before he attempts to conquer Izalco. In trying to conquer the volcano Izalco and thereby shatter the superstitions, at least some of them, which the local natives have always believed in, Reyes explains a little of the background of the people and history of his native land. The church of Panchimalco is typical of a trip to be found in every town and village of this Central American country. The El Tajumal ruins, located about 50 miles from San Salvador, very close to the city of Chalchuapa, and these ruins actually form the nucleus of a group of pre-Columbian remains scattered throughout this area. Similar to their Aztec cousins in Mexico, the tribes here were highly civilized and great builders. Although they worshiped the sun and other idol gods, they abolished the practice of human sacrifice early in their history, showing that they were far more advanced than some of the neighboring Indian nations. In the vicinity of the ruins and a portent of things to come for Hebert are these boiling mud pots, which graphically demonstrate the volcanic nature of this Central American country. But as stifling and mystifying as these mud pots may be, they are only a miniature version of what Hebert will encounter when he actually attempts to scale the rocky and treacherous slopes of Mount Izalco. Even from this distance, just as the natives have done for many centuries, we'll be able to see one of its regular 15-minute eruptions. And it's a dramatic, almost unbelievable phenomena watching her. First quiet and peaceful like any other peak, and then suddenly bellowing forth with a cloud of smoke. And the clouds that we can see now are not just ordinary puffs of just dirt and dust and lava flow like an ordinary volcano, because mighty Izalco throws out red-hot solid rocks. And having seen Izalco from a distance, Hebert's desire to conquer the volcano now becomes intensified. And so with Ray's help, he is now on his way to the guide who will take him the rest of the way. And like the famous guides of the Alpine and Himalaya mountains, many of these men are experts in climbing the surrounding volcanic peaks, but have never gone all the way to the top of Izalco. And at the guide's home, Hebert meets his wife and child. But soon after, it's time to be on their way. Actually, the men are now in the area known as the National Park of Cerro Verde, located 50 miles west of San Salvador. And within the park, there are 3 famous volcanic peaks close to each other. One is Izalco, which, as we've already seen, is quite active. And the second is Cerro Verde, an extinct volcano, 6,168 feet high, after which the park is named. The third is Santa Ana, 7,000 feet high, which Hebert and his guides are ascending now. And looking at a map, it would appear that the men are taking the long way around. It would seem simpler, maybe, to approach Izalco by a direct route. However, taking this zigzagging trail, they are making their ascent much easier. And constantly in the background of every move they make, Izalco gives dramatic views all the time. And although the Santa Ana crater is not active continuously, neither is it dead. The crater is dormant, meaning that it could erupt at any time. In some ways, this is even more precarious than an active volcano. Standing on the edge of the crater, we can look down and see the still smoldering fire, visible proof that she could erupt into a burning inferno at any moment. The Santa Ana volcano is actually the parent crater of Izalco, and Izalco itself, as late as 1770, was nothing more than a small fissure in the ground. But today, just as Santa Ana has done in the past and may still do in the future, Izalco is constantly making itself bigger and bigger because of the rocks which it throws up from the earth. The volcano of Cerro Verde is now extinct, and instead of a boiling pot of rock and fire, it has created a beautiful crater lake called Lake Coatepeque, which means, oddly enough, crater lake. And from Cerro Verde to the ultimate destination of Izalco is a distance of about 5 miles. And this part of the trek is not particularly difficult to travel. The most arduous part, of course, will be when the men actually get to the base of mighty Izalco, which we'll be able to see looming up in the distance as they did. And in 1954, the volcano actually blew its top. And from this high vantage point, we can get an excellent view of the cone of the volcano, which looks like it had its top sawed off. The original cone was blown off and is still partly visible by the black mark near the upper left-hand side of the mountain. Hebert has been warned again that his attempt would be sure suicide because Izalco, unlike most lava-flowing volcanoes, ejects tons of flaming rocks in all directions as it erupts regularly every 15 minutes. The great element of danger, instead of deterring Hebert, only makes him more determined. As he declared in his own words, "All my life I had dreamed of doing something entirely different from anyone else. I had never gone on an adventurous expedition before, and this was my first and possibly last chance to do something unusual. Rather than go to Africa on a safari or up a river on a raft or any other kind of expedition which had already been accomplished, I read about the great volcano of Izalco, and I decided that I would like to be the first man who would climb up those rocky slopes and thence into the burning crater." Hebert and the center of his guides encountered 2 major problems while making the ascent. First, the downpour of rocks, some the size of baseballs, others as big as a building. And second, the shifting wind. With them, the men have a general timetable which records both the time and direction of the constantly occurring eruptions. But the schedule, as the men discover, is not entirely reliable because no man can predict with absolute accuracy which way the wind will blow every 15 minutes. And since the wind determines which way the cloud of death will descend, Hebert and his guides never know when the mass of boulders will come bouncing in their direction. Some of the facts surrounding this adventure are almost as astounding as the feat itself. The filming which we are watching gives the overall impression that the ascent was made in 1 day. Actually, it took 14 days. And like the conquest of any major mountain, the men established their base camp, and then each day proceeded step by step up the rocky slopes. And the volcanic formations are so rough and sharp that Hebert himself wore out 9 pair of heavy shoes during the 14 days that he spent on mighty Izalco. One of the men had his hat blown off. It's the first sign that the wind has shifted and the next burst is heading right in their direction. And when this happens, they literally have to run for their lives to the nearest shelter. And when the rocks have flown by and the wind is blowing in the right direction, again the men continue the assault, edging their way up the 6,000-foot mountain. When they see the clouds of dust and smoke blowing in the opposite direction, they make their best advances. But even then, they have no way of being absolutely certain that the wind will not change at a moment's notice. During the assault, and as the men see and hear the resounding blasts of mighty Izalco, they cannot help but reflect upon the volcanoes of yesterday which have caused so much havoc and devastation. In ancient times, there was Vesuvius and the destruction of Pompeii. In 1896, the volcano of Krakatoa killed 40,000 people in Burma. And as late as 1906, Mount Pelee in Martinique accounted for the death of over 30,000 people. Grim reminders that the roar of a volcano is often the prelude to disaster. Just like climbing Mount Everest or some other monumental peak, the closer the men come to the top, the more precarious their position becomes. And the wind up here is constantly shifting. Although they don't have to combat ice and snow and frostbite, their greatest obstacle is directly the opposite. Up here, right on the crater's edge, the steam from the volcano is almost suffocating, and many of the rocks are as hot as liquid fire. Now that he has made it to the top, the first of Hebert's objectives has been reached. But the second and by far the most dangerous is yet to come. In order to photograph the actual start of an eruption, he will still have to go directly into the crater. His guides have told him that 2 minutes will mean the difference between life and death. That's how long he'll have, 2 minutes, after taking his pictures to scamper to safety. And you'll notice that the film is shaking a bit. That's not because the camera was shaking, although he had every right to be. That is actually the mountaintop itself, trembling from the shock of volcanic blasts. And now, if you'll watch closely, you'll see the start of a volcanic eruption. There there it is, only a puff of smoke to the human eye. And that tiny puff of smoke was the beginning of a roaring inferno that ejected tons of burning boulders out of the bowels of the earth. And then they went hurling down the mountainside in a cloud of thick and dusty smoke. After every eruption, a second one soon follows in its wake, and so the men have to be careful to stay under cover for a few minutes. And his mission accomplished, Hebert should have started scrambling down the mountainside to safety. However, having come this far and gone through so many harrowing experiences, he decided to stick around for a few more blasts, although he didn't care to go back into the center of that boiling crater again. So as a result, he was able to record with his camera these remarkable close-ups of Izalco and all of her burning fury. And after every 15-minute explosion, the men gradually head downhill again. And all of them are just as happy over the outcome as Hebert himself. For many of these natives have always had a fearful superstition about witnessing the actual start of a volcanic eruption. They too thought it could never be done. Surely such an act would be defying the gods. But Duroc J. Hebert, a shoe salesman from Louisiana, proved to them, himself, and the world that their mountain of mystery, like so many other obstacles in our daily lives, can be solved and overcome by man as long as he has the will and the courage to do it.